Okay, so now we move on to Prometheus, the character of the play named after him, that's written by Aeschylus. So this one's more about the artist. It's about the truth of artists specifically, and a little more generally about the creative capacity of human beings. But this one's really about creativity in art, whereas Oedipus was about knowledge and how we fit into nature. Okay. Nietzsche points out that the plot of Prometheus first. This plot's a lot simpler, a lot quicker to summarize than Oedipus. Prometheus was an ancient Greek god, and he when human beings were first made by the gods, so the story goes, so the myth goes, Prometheus felt bad for us because we weren't doing very well. So all the other animals got heavy fur to protect them from the cold. We don't. They got sharp teeth. We don't. They could run really, really fast, or they were really, really big like an elephant. We're not any of those things. So this god Prometheus looked down at us and saw these cold, scared, weak humans. And what he did is he stole fire from the blacksmith god and brought it to human beings. Now, Zeus was mad about this. You don't give stuff from the gods to human beings. You don't give them the special gifts, right? So Zeus and Zeus is the head of the gods, right? He's like the big guy. So his punishment of Prometheus for stealing from the gods and giving to humans was that Zeus chained Prometheus to a rock for all of eternity. And an eagle came by every day and ate Prometheus's liver. Okay? So once more, not realistic. This certainly never happened. And again, it's pretty gruesome. But that's what happened, is an eagle would come by and eat Prometheus's liver, and Zeus would magically make it grow back so that the next day the eagle could come by and eat it all over again. So the themes here that matter are this, is that you've got an exceptional individual, that's Prometheus. So he's not the average man, okay? He's an exceptional person. Goes against the wishes of the gods, so breaks the rules, basically. Okay? And then something great happens, something amazing for all of humanity happens when one titanically striving individual, Nietzsche says, pushes the limits, actively sins, as Nietzsche says on page 50, crosses boundaries, breaks all the rules. So he breaks rules, and then something new happens. So human beings are saved by this new thing that happens, and there's sort of a giant leap forward for humanity. So once they're given fire, which is a technological innovation, it saves them, and it's sort of a leap forward for all of humanity. So Nietzsche says, okay, let's analyze this like we analyze art. Let's look at the symbols and think about what they might mean. He thinks that the character Prometheus stands in for the artist herself, or the artist himself. Okay? The artist is the one who goes beyond what's expected, the one who is, as he says, defiant of the rules, the one who reaches out, he says on page 50, and desires to become something bigger. Okay? And the one who, come hell or high water, is going to do something big and important, right? Who's going to break the rules if need be to do something new and something creative. So Nietzsche says that's the artist, right? The artist is a transgressor. The artist suffers for their art. The artist will commit wrong, or we've been talking about, will present immoral stories if that's interesting. Okay? So we can pause here a little bit and say, okay, think about some of the ideas we have about artists. Artists are often thought to be, a little bit outside of the norm. They're not normal human beings. They're somehow set apart. They're special in some way. So if you think about, if you're an artist, you can ask whether you think that this applies to you. But think about the kids you went with in high school or even at Ball State who are in band or in bands, who paint, who write poetry, right? Don't they seem to sort of operate in their own world a little bit, play by their own rules a little bit? Okay. So Nietzsche here is describing how he thinks artists live in general. Another thing that we have about this is, the artist who suffers for their art. So think about like Van Gogh, where he, he's a little bit crazy, cut off part of his ear. The artist is they feel deeply. So the same way that the liver gets eaten every day of Prometheus, the artist suffers like that too, right? That's their burden, that's their cross to bear. But just like Prometheus, their creative, defiant act is a gift to all humankind. So this is what the artist does. The artist needs to have rules. This is what a painting looks like. This is how poetry is written today. And the artist needs those rules. Why? So they can break those rules. Right? That's how all artistic innovation happens. There's an existing tradition, and the artist breaks with that and creates something new. Similarly, sort of related to that, as Nietzsche says, the artist is the person who doesn't play by society's rules. So think about it. Artists sometimes don't have a lot of friends because they're in their studio all day, right? They don't have 9-to-5 jobs, so they don't contribute to society. And in fact, if you think about it, art is at one level completely useless to society. It's not really for buying and selling. It doesn't cure disease. It doesn't transport goods from one place to another. It doesn't train people in a skill, right? At one level, it's completely socially useless. So the artist is that one who doesn't contribute to society, who in fact goes against the rules of all society. So think about, I don't know, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, right? These like classic rock groups. They're not doing what other people are doing. They're doing crazy stuff backstage that you and I can't even imagine, right? That's how the artist lives. Once more, Nietzsche thinks that he's using ancient Greek art to talk about art in general. So he thinks those things are true of artists in general. They're like outsiders. They transgress society's norms and boundaries. So he's using ancient Greek art to talk about art in general, but he's also telling you what he thinks you should be doing with your life. So the ancient Greeks were sensitive to the truths about human beings and the truths about the world. The truth here is that if you live a common life, you will be common. If you live an uncommon life like Prometheus, which usually involves breaking rules, you might do something that literally changes world history. The difference between humans having fire and technology and humans not having access to that. So you should be, Nietzsche's basically saying, a titanically striving individual. Break the rules, if need be, to do something new and creative and interesting. So here, I want to ask you a question. It's basically a question about rules and people's desire to break the rules. I want to know what you think. Do you think that everyone has in them a desire to break rules? Do you think that everyone has, whether they act on it or not, some kind of inclination that they're drawn towards to say no if they're told they're supposed to say yes? Right? So basically, do you think we all have a rebel inside of us? Okay, Freud, a big thinker, big influence on culture. He thinks we had an internal desire to break rules just because they're rules. Nietzsche thinks so too. But I want to know what you think. Do you think that there's sort of an innate tendency for people to rebel against what they're told they're supposed to be doing. So that's, remember, that's the connection. Nietzsche wants you to live life in the best way possible. He thinks that art can sort of show us some of the best ways possible to live. Now, remember, last time I said that Nietzsche thinks, just like there's better and worse art, there's reasons for why art is good. So we combine those two things. There's reasons why art is good, and then that leads us to say, well, this artwork has a lot of those reasons in it, so it's better. This artwork has less of those reasons in it, so it's less good. Well, as I said last time, Nietzsche thinks that you can compare everything using that basic model, including religions. And on page 50, he says, the myth of the fall, okay, which is sort of a Judeo-Christian myth, right? I mean, he's calling it a myth. But basically it says that, look, everything was perfect. People were just hanging out, Adam and Eve, and then the serpent sort of tricked human beings into it, so that sin is about being fooled by someone. Or another way to interpret is that we were curious, we took a bite of the apple just because we wanted to take a bite of it. But Nietzsche says, look, those are like weak ways to break the rules, right? So he thinks that the lesson of Christianity or Jewish and Christian thought is that sin is sort of inevitable, and it's for all of us, but it comes about through these sort of weak attributes, he says. This is page 50. You're curious about something, or you're open to being fooled and tricked by others. And he's like, that's not interesting, right? He thinks more interesting is the Greek notion of sin, which is that some people live life between the lines. They're the so-called good people, right? They just do what they're told. They do what they're supposed to, right? The artist slash interesting person, the person that Nietzsche wants you to be like, is more like Prometheus, the rare person who deliberately breaks a rule. Not just they get tricked into it, or not just they're curious to see what happens, but like they have an agenda. They want to live outside the lines. It's not a mistake or something that somebody else tricked them into. It's not even just the body like making you do stuff. But Nietzsche says it's this desire to be a rebel, this desire to do things in a new and different way. That's the lesson we get from Greek mythology, that great things come of sin as long as you really strive to break the rules. Whereas the Christian thing is like, well, it's inevitable you'll break the rules. Everyone does it, but you're only doing it because you're either curious or easily deceived or because the body made you do it. And he's like, nothing good is going to come of that attitude. There's nothing interesting there. So that's part of how Nietzsche will analyze art, ways of living, religion, everything. As he says, if something intense and interesting comes out of it, something new comes out of it, we like it. If a repetition of the same old comes out of it, or if an affirmation of weak values like, oh, everyone's going to sin, that's just human curiosity, then he says, like, I don't like the value of those values, if that makes sense. Now, the point here is not, if you're Christian, you got to reject Nietzsche. The point is also not like, if you're an atheist, Nietzsche's got all the answers, right? It's a more general point I want to make here, okay? Is that Nietzsche doesn't just analyze what a way of living says is good and bad. He wants to know whether that attitude towards good and bad is itself good or bad, right? He wants to get behind the values and do what he calls evaluating the values themselves. He thinks the Greek art and myths show good values, strong values that are going to keep us alive and keep us interesting. Most other cultures, though, he thinks have generated sort of weak values, which are like, put your head in the sand kind of values. Just keep your head down, stay quiet. He thinks it's boring, basically, right? He thinks certain kinds of morality are boring, other kinds of morality are more interesting. Okay, backtracking just a little bit in the same section though, section 9. Remember before I said the artist needs rules so that she can break those rules to make new creative art? Nietzsche thinks that's how all history works. Human beings need rules. We need order and rules to live in a society together. But always we're going to want to either individually break those rules or as a society sort of rewrite the rules and start from scratch. That's what history is. Kings are one kind of rules. Then we rebelled against the kings. We came up with a new kind of rule, democracy. Well, now we're in a process of now we're rebelling against democracy. Right? We say maybe it shouldn't be majority rules. Maybe the individual should have even more individual freedom. Or some people go the other way and they say democracy isn't working. We need more things like the UN. We need more transnational movements. Okay. Nietzsche thinks that's how art advances. There's a general set of rules, generally accepted things that can happen in music, say, and then we break with that. So it used to be you couldn't sing in a rap song. Well, now you have rappers who sing half the time and rap the other half of the time. Okay. And history works the same way. Humans invent a meaning or significance. That's what the ancient Greeks did. Then after a while, it stops working. We don't like that meaning and that value and that significance anymore. So we tear it down and we start from scratch and we build up something new. So this is the next evolution we're going to take in sections 10 and 11. Nietzsche says, as beautiful and as full of life as Greek tragedy was. It's really one of the high points of world history, he thinks. It too must come to pass. It too is going to pass away. And he says, what happens is everything lives and everything dies. So ancient Greek art had its moment in the sun, and then it started to shrivel and wither, he says. So why did that happen? Well, the general answer is that everything is going to die. The specific answer, though, is the two people killed tragedy, he thinks. Two people killed tragedy. One is Euripides, who we'll talk about in a moment. He's another playwright, and Nietzsche hates his plays. Remember when I told you Nietzsche thinks that what you hate is just as illuminating as what you love? So what's bad about the world shows you just as much about what it is as what's good in the world can show you what it's like. And he says Euripides, you see this on page 54, he was the last playwright of serious Greek tragedy, and he drained it of all of its life force. Also, we see this hinted at the end of section 11, where we're going to end today. There's another person who helped kill tragedy and take everything good from it and destroy it, he says. We'll leave that as a little surprise for next time. Okay? But, so, we talked about two playwrights who Nietzsche loved. There's Sophocles is the first one, and then Aeschylus. Sophocles wrote Oedipus Rex, among other plays. Aeschylus wrote Prometheus, Prometheus Bound. Now we have Euripides. So Nietzsche hates Euripides. He says all these awesome insults about Euripides. And for him, that shows just as much, that tells us about what the world is and isn't, how it should and should not be. So what's the problem with Euripides? So remember, philosophers are always, they have a general point and then they apply it to a bunch of different particular points. And what they're trying to show you is that there's a general way to understand things that you can see in lots of different areas. So even Nietzsche, who's sort of chaotic as far as philosophers go, there's a lot more Dionysus in him than most philosophers. Even he has a few basic points, and he logically and consistently applies them to different particulars. So you should be able to guess at this point before we go further. If two playwrights, Sophocles and Aeschylus, are good because they show us deep and interesting truths about human beings and our place in the world. And if another way to put that is that for both Sophocles and Aeschylus, they're good because there's lots of Apollo and lots of Dionysus in their plays, then why is Euripides going to be bad according to Nietzsche? If he says good is dark and interesting truths about human beings and Apollo and Dionysus, then why would someone be bad? Because they don't tell us interesting, deep truths about human beings, and because they lack Apollo and Dionysus. You see how that's him consistently applying the same basic idea? Okay, so we see on page 54, the end of section 10, he says, "What did you want, wicked Euripides, when you sought to force tragedy to do slave's work for you? Tragedy died at your hands. You needed a copy and a mask so that you could use the old trappings of tragedy to deck yourself out very prettily." And he says, all you could manage was this copied, masked music. Because you deserted Dionysus, Apollo too has deserted you. So, Euripides tried to cast out all the Dionysus-type elements from his play. No more intoxication, no more mixing, right? No more confusion, no more wisdom of Silenus and dark truth. And because all art has to have Apollo and Dionysus together, metaphorically Nietzsche's saying, you chase away one, you lose the other. The very precise point, or like the clear way to put it, is that Euripides sucks as a playwright because there's no Apollo and there's no Dionysus. The two things you need for good art are both missing. So how did this happen exactly? There's lots of details here that Nietzsche says. For instance, early tragedy had a chorus, and just like in music, the chorus is a group of people singing together. Okay, Euripides got rid of that chorus. No group singing means no Dionysus, because Dionysus is the god of music and the god of drunken crowds. Okay, that's a detail. The basic point is on page 55. Euripides wrote for the first time tragedies about common people. This is what Nietzsche says. He says, Euripides brought the spectator onto the stage for the first time. He basically made average people into main characters. So he says, Euripides put on the stage the faithful mask of reality. Everyday life was pushed onto the stage. Tragedy used to reveal only great and bold features and now becomes painfully and boringly true to life. So remember, Sophocles put a wise man who had a crazy life story on the stage. And what's the end of that play? He gouges his own eyes out. That is capital D dramatic stuff right there. What did Aeschylus write about? A god who basically invented or saved the human race by giving us technology, and who every day was punished for it by another god. So it's a war between gods with human beings as benefactors, where humans take a giant leap out of the Stone Age before fire into the modern world. That's pretty interesting. I almost said that's pretty effing interesting, right? Because it's, yeah, that's a good story. So who does Euripides put in his plays instead? House slaves. People who have menial day-to-day tasks. People who are mediocre, Nietzsche says on page 56. And he says, everyday life and activity, things which everyone is capable of judging. That's what he brought up on stage. So instead of grand clashes between gods, it's like the dispute between one household worker and another. Instead of one amazing individual, Oedipus, who is both the best and the worst human being, right? The wisest, but also he did some pretty bad stuff. Okay? It's just, the neighbor, the guy next door. Now remember, Nietzsche says that art should reflect the biggest, most dramatic aspects of the universe, and that we as individuals should strive to live up to the crazy, intense, amazing, creative things that happen in art. What happens with Euripides, though, and in our own modern day, as I'll mention in a second, is that art stops talking about the big, the new, the interesting, and it just chats about the same old BS that you see in your own life. So now art is basically journalism. We want a realistic story instead of an interesting story. We want something we can relate to, something that meets us where we're at today, instead of something like Prometheus that demands that we change and create for the future. So how can you have a hero, like a real capital H hero, like Hercules, right? Or, Superman or something, if all you're portraying is the girl next door, the neighbor next door? Right? Nothing interesting is going to come of that. You have no heroes to live up to anymore. You just have yourself painted on the screen. So why I say, well, that's happening today is, first we could just point to reality TV. Instead of watching, some movie about, like a recent Quentin Tarantino movie from a few years back, the one where the Jewish Americans go behind Nazi lines to hunt down Nazi high-ranking officers, right? Okay, it never happened, right? But it's an interesting story, right? It's got the underdog, the Jewish people who Hitler was trying to kill. It's got all these amazing gunfights, right? All this sort of stuff. Nietzsche would say, okay, that's pretty cool. That's fine. But instead of watching things like that, we watch reality TV shows where, like The Bachelorette or something, where there's a girl, she sort of likes a guy, she sort of likes another guy. She'll have to choose. And Nietzsche's attitude is like, why would you watch that? What is interesting about that? We've all been in that situation. So why would you want to watch repeated on a screen something that's already happened to you? Right? It doesn't make sense to him. So Nietzsche would say, a lot of the art that we consume today, the love songs we listen to, right, the movies, the TV we watch, they're as good as real life, but they're no better than real life. Remember, Apollo wants to show you things that are like a dream, more interesting than real life. Apollo wants to show you things that are beautiful, so beautiful they can't possibly be real, right? Apollo wants you to get past real life by going beyond it and seeing something that, yes, is fake, not realistic, but is more interesting, more beautiful, more vivid, more pleasurable than regular life. And Nietzsche thinks that what we do now is we just go for something that's comfortable. He says on 57, he says, we used to have profound and fierce natures, and art reflected that. Now we're fleeing from all that's grave and frightening, and we have cowardly contentment with comfortable pleasure. Okay, he says, it's a kind of senile and slavish enjoyment of life, and it's a bland cheerfulness. You might as well like look up at noon and say, oh, there's the sun in the sky, how pleasant, right? We've been there, we've done that. So remember, Nietzsche's here talking about an older artwork that he thinks is bad, but he wants us to take life lessons from it now. Basically what Nietzsche is saying, he's saying, don't limit yourself to what you did yesterday. Don't limit yourself to being like what other people do. Don't try to be the girl next door or the boy next door. Don't repeat what you've already seen. Don't live within society's bounds. And if you're going to have drama in your life, make sure it's capital D drama. Intense, interesting stuff that's going to change something. And he thinks we don't have that in our artwork today. And Euripides was one of the people in the past who also didn't have that in his artwork. So he says, Euripides gave up on his belief in immortality. That is the immortality that a true artist can have. Okay? He gave up on his belief in an ideal future. He got frivolous. This is all page 56. He was stuck in the present moment with frivolous, capricious desires. Okay, and he says, it's the bland cheerfulness of someone who knows no greater responsibility, no higher ambition, nothing in the past or future of higher value than the present moment. That's what Nietzsche thinks art is like today. And even more importantly, he thinks that's what our lives are like today. All these cliches that we all know are part of our world. It's a rat race. You got the 9 to 5, the grind. All these jokes about like, oh, somebody's got a case of the Mondays, right? Movies like Office Space, movies like Fight Club, right? TV shows like The Office. We all know that we're living in this world that's just the same thing. Monday looks like Tuesday, Tuesday looks like Wednesday, and we're working for the weekend. And what do we do on the weekend? We watch movies, good, and we get drunk. That's Apollo and Dionysus, right? Beautiful images in the movies, Apollo, more or less. Getting drunk, that's Dionysus. But Nietzsche says, why have only 2 days a week that are devoted to what life really is and should be? Why, for goodness sakes, he says, would you sit down after a long day of work, which you hate, and watch reality TV shows, which are no better than your real life? Don't you want to do something bigger, different, newer? He says, no, we go home, we check into Facebook to watch our friends doing the same things that we're doing. We watch Big Brother, where there's a TV show in a house where people do things like they do in a house. Eat, talk, sleep. He says, what's the point in that? We're stuck on a treadmill, right? He wants you to be less like Euripides, where you praise the common and everyday, more like Prometheus, where you're on the lookout for a chance to do something big and new and interesting. And I expect that all of you are willing and able to be a modern day Prometheus. That you also have high hopes for yourselves that you're going to accomplish something interesting and new. So the question I ask you is, who do you think are the modern day Prometheus is? Who are those people who are doing something new, something creative, something that might, break a few eggs, but is going to make a new fancy omelet? Who do you think are the ones shaking up the world and reshaping it, just as the artist reshapes the material of paint or clay or wood or what have you? Okay? Who do you think are the people making new rules by breaking the old rules? And with that question, we'll end this recording. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about Nietzsche in the discussion board. As always, if you have any questions, email me. We can set up a Skype meeting where we can talk through video, face-to-face, anything you want. If you have questions, just let me know. Thanks, everyone.